As the HEMA community grows, so too does the number of suppliers and the quality of makers for various pieces of gear that are used by this community. And certainly this is very true for anything that deals with the longsword, because that's kind of the bread and butter within the HEMA world. So this actually ends up manifesting itself when you take a look at things such as faders, and there are more and more makers of faders out there, and no fader is perfect, and everyone's kind of trying to find that perfect fader. And in that effort, we're actually seeing some very unique things happen. There are some tests that are happening, essentially some market tests, as well as quality and material tests. And this we will see here with the two swords we're going to take a look at. These two swords are actually the exact same model. There's a slight variation, and that's of very unique interest because it's trying to solve a very specific problem that has been seen for a very long time within the HEMA world. So let's take a look at these two swords. These are the SGT custom faders. The SGT implementation of a fader is very basic, no frills, and exactly kind of what you'd expect in a good, solid trainer. I've said this many times in other fader reviews that while I really do value aesthetics, when it comes to faders, that definitely has to take second place. And realistically, you're not necessarily looking to have the most visually impressive item, because you're going to put this through its paces, you're really going to beat it up, and after a few practice sessions, it's not going to look as pretty as you might want it to. And that's okay, because that's really not the purpose of these weapons as a tool. All that said, it doesn't mean that there hasn't been a very, very good implementation on these faders. Even though it has a very generous distal taper down the length of the blade, there are no visible grind marks. Everything is very clean, well polished. The fitting is extremely well fit. They have an interesting implementation on how they do the shield to the shoulder to the tang. It looks like it's kind of a stepped implementation, so there's actually kind of a minor gap between the crossguard and the shield, but it's all fit very well. It's all very solid. And this wrapping on this handle, we'll be talking a bit about wrapping in this review, because the real difference between the two faders that I have here is actually the grip. The wrapping is actually fairly well done. This leather feels nice, it looks nice. I will say there are a couple of problems. One is this design of wrap, this implementation can lend itself to becoming unraveled fairly easily. This has actually occurred right here near the pommel at one point, which I'll have to fix before I send it back to the person who loaned this to me. It's not entirely clean either, because there's a couple places where they ran out of the material, and so they just kind of laid on a new piece, and it kind of visually breaks it. But again, these are visual issues. These are not functional issues, except for maybe it coming undone a bit. But again, it's function. Function is what matters for this. So actually, let's talk about functionality. And we will actually get back to the grip in a moment when we're talking about functionality, because there's a very interesting thing being done on this other one. So the first thing I'll notice down here near the tip, it's got a nice bend to it. It can take that nice pressure. It's a very, very wide tip, so it's going to be pretty darn safe in a thrust. Although one concern I have is that it looks like a lot of that bend is done via the amount of distal taper that's happened, and the width here at the tip of the blade. It's a little bit concerning to me, just because I know that a good thrust could actually either permanently put a bend in that tip, or it could result in breakage, and of course breakage of any kind could then also result in some dangerous situations. That's not to say that hasn't been considered. It all feels very, very good, well implemented, and so I don't have any doubts that this would actually hold up fairly well. One other problem with the tip here is that in a tournament setting, trying to do a tipping method for it, a lot of people are actually really commonly using washers or pieces of like the chair padding, and I know that there's a lot of custom solutions that have been done. None of these would actually fit this very easily, so the tipping for this blade would have to be done a little bit different for a tournament, but that's a minor thing that whoever owns the sword would have to figure out for themselves. Otherwise, no real complaints with the blade. Everything feels real good. It's all well balanced. Actually, the balance point actually sits just a little bit behind the shield, which is interesting. Usually it sits right at it. And overall, again, the construction all feels good. I do have one problem with kind of the wobbliness of the blade. You can feel that a little bit in usage. It might be a little bit too flexible. Again, you can compare that to the relative safety that you might want to have, and having that flex could actually be beneficial. The grip overall on this leather one feels good. In fact, this is the one I actually really prefer using without gloves, mostly because the other one that we'll take a look at here in a moment has some problems with how the grip feels. I am extremely happy with the way this fader actually performs. Its agility is really, really good, actually. It's a little bit surprising given the weight. This is actually a little bit heavy for a fader. It doesn't feel it at all. It feels very good in the hands, feels very, very light given that it is certainly over 3 pounds. And yeah, I think it's a really good implementation. I'd be happy with this as a fader. I think it's a good tool that could be used and have a good longevity. I'll be very interested to see, as more of these come out into the HEMA community, how they hold up against some of the other kind of more commonly used faders. Now, moving on to this implementation, specifically of the grip, they've used a very different type of material here, and I don't actually know what it is. It kind of looks like medical gauze, black medical gauze. It feels kind of like it could be a form of Kevlar, honestly. I actually don't know. I'll have to go do some research. If I can figure out exactly what they've used, I will post it as a subnote for this video. I'll make some notes here. It doesn't look as pretty. In fact, the implementation, the wrapping on it is really haphazard, especially when you get down here near the pommel. But it's, again, functionality that matters. And this is where this becomes very interesting, because it's setting itself apart from other fader designs out there. A lot of faders use either leather wrapping or cord wrapping, and cord has become a very common go-to, mostly because it holds up very well. And that holding up isn't just about the wear and tear that a hand will put on it. Certainly, people who have used metal gauntlets as a form of protection in HEMA tournaments know swords don't really hold up too well to that. They get cut and they begin to fall apart, and the wrapping jobs can become, well, rather tattered. And on top of that, errant sword strikes can also happen. You're fighting an opponent and you're getting out there and they hit right in between. That can do some serious damage to a lot of different wrapping designs. This one is designed to account for all of that. Because it's this kind of high quality, very resilient material, it can take those strikes, it can take a lot of scratching, a lot of wear and tear, and it doesn't really fall apart. SGT actually posted a little video that showed them trying out various materials, showing what it looks like with like leather wrapped handle, where when it gets hit you begin to see marks appear and it can tear up over time. And then they take it to another little I think it's actually a rondel dagger that takes the hits, and you can see that it holds up extremely well. And that's exactly what the expectation would be here. This wrapping is going to really hold up. It's not going to need to be rewrapped. It's not going to tear up over time. And hopefully that is true for this whole sword. Now, I use these very lightly, very sparingly, mostly to get an idea of how they felt in the hand. Again, a little bit of wobbliness that would occur. And generally speaking, I, again, am very happy with it. I think it's a good implementation. So again, curious to see what happens as more and more people use these type of faders out there in the community. And I'm very interested to see what SGT brings next, because they've already made one kind of interesting modification to what we use as modern faders, and I hope we see more of that. So overall, I'm very happy with these fader designs. I think they're really good. I certainly want to see them take a beating, and for their price, I think it's a fairly decent deal. It's kind of hard to get into that kind of mid-range fader price. And of course, these are custom designed, so the prices can potentially vary based on the request. But overall, I think it would be a good fader purchase. And my only real criticism at the end of the day is going to be just how this tip was implemented, because it is so thin. I'm a little bit worried about that, but won't really have any strong criticism past that. until we see these more in action and see them hold up over time. This is the SGT Custom Fader. I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out Medieval Review on Patreon.